Sometimes people say that they are burnt out and they need a break. But what happens when the break that they've been saying they need comes and they complain about the break just as much, if not more, than they did about the burnout that they were experiencing that sent them wanting the break? I'm Kyle Henson. I'm the lead pastor at Spring Valley Church in Reading, Pennsylvania. And this weekend is the 5th anniversary of the first time our church ever had to go virtual for an entire worship service. 5 years ago this weekend was the first time I stepped into an essentially empty auditorium with a sparse and spread out worship team and just a few tech people. We hadn't gotten everything figured out in terms of color balance, and so our colors were a little bit off, but we were able to go virtual with our worship service as our congregation gathered in a distributed fashion all across Berks County and watched the worship service. And of course, the reason that we had to do that was because it was the first weekend of the lockdown during the COVID-19 pandemic. Last week was the 5th anniversary of the lockdown happening, and I talked about how it's an anniversary that none of us want to remember, all of us want to forget, we all want to move past, and yet I am convinced that there are lessons that we need to learn from that. Last week, I gave some big picture thoughts about how social media, I am convinced, is a problem more than it is a solution, and contributes to an epidemic of loneliness, an epidemic of isolation, and puts us in echo chambers that actually reinforce some of the negative emotions that we're experiencing. Today, I want to talk very briefly about how hustle culture is sick, it's making us sick, and yet we are addicted to the sickness. So I won't repeat all of last week's video. If you didn't see it, you can go back and watch it. But I talked about how I was on vacation in Florida when the lockdown happened. And so I get back to Pennsylvania after vacation, and the first week actually wasn't too bad. I enjoyed a breather. I was in a season of life where church was busy, where my kids, their activities and their social life was getting busy. It was the early stages of as a parent, you feel like you're an Uber driver taking your kids to basketball games and other activities. And life was just starting to get to a pace that was a little bit stressful. And so honestly, the first several weeks of the pandemic were a nice breather for me. I was able to continue to study. It was starting to get nice outside. I could get my books and my computer, and I could try and find a park, or I could try to find somewhere outside where people weren't around. Although, you might remember, even then, we thought if we were outside and we had a mask on, we still might be in danger. I don't know if you remember those days. We really thought that if we were outside, we might kill somebody, or we might catch a fatal illness because somebody might walk past. There's so much that we didn't know, and there was so much fear that we were living in. But I liked the slower change of pace. In fact, at one point I thought, if it's only 2 weeks, this might be an annual tradition. Nothing about health, but maybe this is an annual tradition that we need to start as a country. Just giving everybody 2 weeks off. 2 weeks where the malls shut down. 2 weeks where restaurants shut down. 2 weeks where movie theaters shut down. Just 2 weeks to relax. But of course, it went on a lot longer than 2 weeks. But what I found that for me, initially, it was a sigh of relief, a breath of fresh air to have a less busy schedule and to spend more time with my family. I found almost immediately some people felt an increased measure of anxiety. Almost immediately, you started seeing addictive behaviors go up, alcohol abuse, domestic instances, anxiety, depression. And almost immediately, people, including Christians, said that we needed to open society back up so that people weren't cramped up as much as possible and people were not being led to addictive, self-destructive behaviors. and people were not living in increasingly negative mental health situations. People felt trapped. But this is one of the things that I don't believe that we learned during the pandemic that I think that we need to learn. People felt trapped in their own homes with their own families. I'm convinced that one of the lessons that we need to learn from COVID-19 is that hustle culture is sick. And yet we choose that sickness, not because we love it. We choose that sickness because too often home is even sicker. In too many homes, including Christian homes, the relationship between the husband and the wife, the relationship between the parents and the children is so superficial that once the family is forced to be together with limited distractions for an extended period of time, instead of it being a blessing, it starts to feel more like a burden. Instead of it being a relief, it starts to feel more like a curse. And for me, as soon as I heard people saying we need to open back up so people don't feel trapped with their families and mental health can get better and addictions won't get worse and domestic abuse instances won't get worse, to me, immediately that seemed like we were addressing the symptom and not the cause. Because when you open back up, all you do is give people options to distract themselves from what I am convinced is an existential crisis in their homes, an existential crisis in their marriages, and an existential crisis between parents and children generationally. So of course we opened back up, and don't get me wrong, by the time we opened back up, it had been long enough. I was happy. I was ready to get out. I was ready to go back to the gym, right? I was ready. It was a whole lot longer than 2 weeks. But we opened back up, and a whole lot of families, I believe, defaulted back to hustle culture. And that's everything from work to sports to shopping to leisure activities to distractions, any number of things. Honestly, anything and everything, as long as they don't have to be around a table or in a living room with the people they share a home with and the people they share a last name with. As long as they didn't have to do that for a prolonged period of time, they would take any other option available. In the Old Testament, when the children of Israel were being led out of Egypt, they rebelled against God multiple times. And one time, God sent a plague of snakes to bite the children of Israel. And when the Israelites were dying and they were crying out to God, Moses prayed, and God told Moses to make a bronze serpent and to put it on a pole, and to put that pole in an elevated place that all the people of Israel could look at it. And anybody who had been bitten by a snake could look at that bronze serpent, a bronze replica of the very thing that bit them. And when they stared at it, God would bring healing to them. It seems like a bizarre story, but I believe it's very, very profound. Because oftentimes the solution to the thing that's hurting us is to look intently, to force ourselves not to be distracted, to look at the thing hurting us. Because as we look at the thing hurting us, we'll find the solution. So when home isn't right, the solution isn't to open up every option available and to essentially turn home into a glorified hotel that you spend the night at and grab a quick meal before you leave for work and school and whatever else you're doing. No, it's to look at the pain, to look at the anxiety, to look at the depression, to look at the temptations to escape through substance abuse, to look at that in your family, in your home, in your marriage, and to not flinch. And instead of allowing the reality of your situation to cause you despair and to give up on your family, to give up on your marriage, to work harder and to say, no, I believe that we can have a good marriage. I believe we can have a generational connection. It doesn't have to be a generational gap. There can be a generational connection. And so you look at the serpent. You look at the thing causing you misery. You look at the dis-ease in the home. And you own it. And then you start finding solutions. And that could be reading books. That could be going to conferences and retreats. That could be talking to a therapist or a counselor. That could be intentionally planning family events that bring connection. But if we're going to learn lessons from the pandemic, I believe one of the lessons is that families all across America, Christian as well as non-Christian, are not well. And it doesn't have to be that way. And 5 years later, a whole lot of families are still distracting themselves, ignoring the problem, instead of having the courage to look at the pain, to look at the serpent, to look at the dis-ease in their home, and begin to find healing solutions. Because there are resources out there for people who are serious about making home a healthier place. If you find these conversations I've been having about the pandemic 5 years later interesting, I'd love you to put a comment down below. I'd appreciate it if you like this video. Maybe share it with somebody that might find it interesting. Subscribe to my channel, and I'll be putting out a video pretty soon. The more engagement I get, the more people seem to be interested in this topic, the faster I'll get the videos out. All right, until next time, have a great day. Goodbye.